Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Golf and Politics. We have a great guest today, but before we get started, Rob, it was quite a weekend for sports, and usually we like to talk a little bit about what happened on the golf course and professional golf, which was great. Riviera is a great course. I'm sure maybe you have some thoughts there, but I also have to say, the United States winning the gold medal in hockey, men's hockey, for the first time in either of our lifetimes. It was 1980 the last time they won, and pretty epic game. I was walking into church, and I was actually teaching Sunday school yesterday. And so, like, on the way in, I have to turn it off as it goes into overtime. And then I had guys in my Sunday school who were like, don't tell me anything, I'm going to watch it later. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So, what a game. Did you get to catch any of that hockey game? I'm usually not a hockey fan, but I'm a big fan of international games like this because it's very intense.
I did. I watched the third period and was blown away. Congrats to Team USA, and also congrats to Kash Patel, who had his first beer after the game. It was really impressive.
I had a client tell me, he's like, this is a bad look for an FBI director, isn't it? And I sent back my client the clip of Billy Bob Thornton from Landman. We sitting at the bar, and the guy goes, you want something stronger, or are you going to stick with beer? He goes, no, I'll stick with beer. I quit drinking a long time ago. And the guy goes, well, you know there's alcohol in a Michelob Ultra. He goes, but there's more alcohol in orange juice than there is in Michelob Ultra. So,
well, as a DC lobbyist, I'm not sure there's a good look for an FBI director.
But pretty epic. And I mean, this is, I thought that what was cool about it is a lot of these guys on this team, they grew up. They were little kids watching when the United States lost to Canada. Was it 2010 or 2014? I can't remember. But these guys were kids watching that, and just the passion that they have. I understand there was about $500,000 worth of contracts between Canada and the United States of NHL players on that ice playing for pride. And, congrats to both countries for putting on a heck of a show for the whole world to see. But definitely glad the United States owned Canada in both men's and women's hockey.
I was bummed to see that Sidney Crosby didn't get to play.
Yeah.
Big Sid fan, as I know you are as well. Would have loved to have seen Canada at full strength. And, hey, maybe when they're our 51st state, they'll be able to play.
Exactly. So, that's good. That's good. Then we'll be unstoppable. Yeah. But speaking of golf, look, I didn't watch a ton of Riviera this weekend. I had other things going on. The one thing that I caught that was impressive to me was Tiger Woods' interview on CBS, joined the broadcast on Saturday. And ultimately, what's really neat to see is Tiger Woods now being more of an elder statesman for golf, and him talking about these guys playing and referring to them as kids. And I start thinking, well, Tiger's only 6 years older than me, so these guys really are kids. I mean, my son is our producer. He's 19. Like, these guys playing on tour are closer to my son's age than they are to mine, which made me very nostalgic. I remember Tiger at 16 teeing it up at LA Country Club. I was 11-year-old kid into golf, and just this phenom's coming on the scene. I knew all about it, so it was really fun to watch him be a host of this tournament, and I think he does just an excellent job of that. He's quite the ambassador for the game of golf.
I think the new guys on tour are pretty boring. Like, none of them lead exciting lives like Tiger, like flipping clothes. And I mean, none of them have their wife chasing them with a 4-iron.
Yeah.
They crash into a fire hydrant or a tree. Like, we need to bring back, Tiger's character.
That's true.
I really miss it. It's lacking.
Well, Rob, tomorrow, before we get into our guest, tomorrow is the State of the Union. And so I'm going to set my timer here, or else we'll never get to our guest. You haven't aired any grievances about Trump for a while, so what do you think? 60 seconds to give us your take on tomorrow's State of the Union.
Well, I'm just shocked that you haven't released your press releases for all your candidates yet about what a great speech he gave. Do you even need...
We already have it. We have them. I'm pausing your time. We have them saved, ready to roll, ready to hit send after the speech tomorrow.
Well, at least the economy's doing well. 1.4% GDP growth in the fourth quarter. I mean, that's terrible. He promised us 8%. Look, unless you're building detention centers or data centers, the rest of this economy is in a recession. 40% of the stock market is in the hands of 5 companies that are all tech companies and all receiving billions of dollars in subsidies and government gifts. If I were to take credit for one thing as Donald Trump, he has now made Democrats hate government. We now hate government as much as Republicans used to claim to hate it. And as a former Republican and former colleague of yours, I used to be in favor of limited government, responsible government. And if you think this is what limited government is, from the party that hates government, wait until my friends get back in power and follow your lead, because a rude awakening is coming. And I think, our guest today is very familiar with what it takes to lose the majority and win the majority. This is feeling like a wave year to me. And I'm on a daily basis, all jokes aside, disgusted by what I'm seeing from this administration. The corruption, endless lying, and frankly, I'm not even sure whose side they're on. I know it's not ours. I know it's not the American people.
Okay, minute 45. You got it in. I'm going to save my rebuttals for later, but why don't you introduce our great guest that we have today? I'm actually genuinely excited to hear what he has to say. He's got a very interesting background.
Our guest today is Sean O'Brien, and Sean is a former colleague, my boss, a mentor, and also a friend. He is a proud Irish American from New York City. Went to the same high school as Politico's Dick Morris and Gerald Nadler, which I find hilarious. He is the son of a school teacher and a police officer. I was tempted to say Irish cop, but I don't want to get into stereotypes. But an Irish cop, nonetheless. He graduated from Northwestern University and the U.S. Naval War College in Washington, D.C. Fun fact, was a roommate with Seth Meyers, performed at Second City in Chicago, and really such a unique blend of politics and improv, because we all know here that there's a lot of improv in politics. Sean then came to Washington, D.C., He worked for Rahm Emanuel. He helped put you and I out of work in 2006. I then switched parties. He becomes my colleague. Sean would go on to have an epic career as a chief of staff to multiple members of Congress. He served as the Midwest political director for Obama America in 2012. He was also a special assistant to the president and a speechwriter for Obama and Biden, and Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. He currently is a professor at Georgetown University and is the author of a very successful children's book series called White House Clubhouse. My general summary of all of that is that Sean can't hold down a job. This is somebody that's had at least 10 careers, but he's been good at all of them. So I'm really excited to hear what the next one is. Matt, I'll turn it over to you to ask the first question.
Well, this real quick before my first question. Sean, you've got a name, Sean O'Brien. There's somebody else in the political world named Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters president, who my client, Mark Wayne Mullen, threatened to fight during a hearing, and now they're best buddies and on podcasts together, so politics makes strange bedfellows. So do you get confused with the Teamsters president from time to time? Because there's another Matt Parker in politics. I constantly get emails from people thinking that I'm him, and then there's a guy named there's two guys named Brian Walsh that work in politics. They get confused all the time. So does that happen to you ever?
So I actually got all kinds of props from friends and things when he was getting into it with Mark Wayne, and then after the convention, suddenly they're like, "Oh, you guys suck," and all that. But the best response was somebody that I hadn't talked to in like 5 years texts me out of nowhere and says, "You are now Michael Bolton from Office Space." And I couldn't figure out what he was talking about until finally it occurred to me. He's like, that asshat screwed up my name. That's what it was.
That's great. That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit. Rob alluded, you grew up in New York City. You went to this high school, the same high school as Dick Morris, Gerald Nadler, two very famous political people. At what point in your life as a young person did politics become an interest for you, and you had developed a passion for it?
Yeah, I was a little steeped in it growing up in New York, but then my real political awakening was when I ended up living in Chicago after college. Like Chicago, the great thing about Chicago politics is there's absolutely nothing hidden about it. It's like watching a ball game. You know exactly what the rules are and what the score is at all times. And, I just totally got the bug. Started, canvassing for a local aldermanic candidate because I thought she was hot. And, then started to learn how it all works. And then later on, years down the road, I ended up moving to D.C. because my girlfriend is now my wife got a job out here. And I had this opportunity to go into IT. Like I'd been pretty successfully working in IT out in Chicago. And I was offered a job, well-paying out in McLean. And then on the same day, I was offered an unpaid internship on the Hill. And I realized there was something seriously wrong with me, and that I immediately knew I was taking the unpaid internship.
That's great.
But and that turns out it was Rahm Emanuel's office, who was a freshman at the time. It was kind of not a known figure, but we hit it off well. I was never an important person in that office, but I was the most sarcastic prick around, aside from him. So it actually, I ended up writing speeches for him fairly quickly. We ended up lining up very nicely. Oh, and you were talking about Jerry Nadler and Dick Morris. Let me just sidebar for a second on a story there. I had known that both of them went to Stuyvesant at the same time, but I didn't know they were there at the same time. And then I see Nadler sitting in the Longworth cafeteria all by himself one day. So I had to go and suck up to him. Congressman, sorry to bother you, but I went to Stuyvesant. He's like, oh, sit down. Let me tell you how Dick Morris got me elected. I'm like, okay. Speaking of strange bedfellows, all right. And it turns out they were in the same class, and even back then, Dick Morris thought of himself as a political genius. And his way of proving this was he was going to, Nadler's words, not mine, get the fat kid elected.
Wow.
And so Morris ran Nadler for student union president against some popular football player, and he won. And then years later, they go to separate colleges and all that, and then Dick Morris calls Nadler out of the blue and says, look, there's an assembly seat opening on the Upper West Side, and, you live there, you got to run for it, I'll manage your campaign. And so he gets him elected in New York State Assembly. And so I'm like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Do you guys still keep in touch? And he goes, oh, hell no. I'm like, all right.
That's a fantastic story. So let's talk about working for Rahm Emanuel, because it's been established Rob and I worked for Congressman Bob Ney. Mm-hmm. He was the poster boy for the culture of corruption. Bob Ney, who's still a great friend of ours, two-time guest on the program, who Bob and I are very thankful for the start we got working for him. But Rahm Emanuel played a big role in making sure that Bob Ney did not come back to Congress. And now, I will also tell you this, as a political operator myself, political operative, I think the world of Rahm Emanuel as far as just somebody that can get the job done and winning elections. Like, he gets it. So what was it like working for him? And during that time, had to be exciting as a Democrat, because it was not exciting for a Republican like me, because we lost everything in 2006.
Well, look, as long as we're risking our political careers with you admitting to liking Rahm Emanuel, I like Bob Ney. And, as you said, he became the poster child for it, but mainly because he was the one who was like, the spotlights went on. I still don't believe that it was him leading all this sort of stuff. I think, the Jack Abramoff and the United States of Money, documentary really kind of put it all in the right place on that. We'll leave it at that. But so when I'm working for Rahm, he was he had figured out what a freshman congressman actually can do, which is not just line up and vote in useless committee stuff. It's that, go out and start swinging. And he took all of his Clinton administration stuff. And every day he'd be going down there to deliver 1-minute speeches, 5-minute speeches, and he was completely burning his senior staff out. I'm at the front desk just wrangling interns and stuff. But I just started writing little speeches for him. And one that ended up really hitting was, there was a lobbying reform that y'all were trying to pass in order to clean up before the election. And somebody made a remark, oh, this sounds like a love letter to lobbyists. And so I pulled out the Elizabeth Barrett Browning, how do I love thee? Dear K Street, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depths of thy oil wells, for thou shalt have 14.9. I'm working in statistics with 5 points in them. But I did it in this stupid structure, and it hit. It gets repeated on CNN 5 times that day, and then it gets printed in the Chicago Tribune, at which point I was able to contact my old English professor at Northwestern and ask him if he'd ever gotten a poem in the Trib. But so at that point, Rahm actually knew who the hell I was. And that helped me kind of move a little bit on the way towards ending up working with this guy, because, then when the 2006 cycle was coming up, obviously there was going to be some interesting things happening. I go out to work on Heath Schuler's campaign, not knowing anything about Heath. I didn't even know he was a football player. I'm a New York Giants guy, but I don't even remember him throwing a whole ton of interceptions our way. But I go down there to help out, and because I come from Rahm's office, everybody immediately assumes I know what I'm talking about. They had me running legal protection, and it wasn't until 5 years later that they find out I wasn't even a lawyer. But so then when he gets elected, I volunteer to help put together the staff, and I Dick Cheney'd myself into the legislative director role. And then I meet Rob, who turns out was doing exactly the same thing of being the one-eyed man in the kingdom of the blind. And so suddenly we're the only two people with Hill experience.
Well, I want to hear, like, what is it like meeting young Rob, who, by the way, kind of has a similar story. He used to write stuff for Bob Ney, and Bob would read on the floor or in interviews. Rob proved himself to be, more than an intern from day one. He was a staff assistant and was more than that, too. So I always say, if you work in politics and you have some talent, you can rise to the top pretty quickly.
Absolutely
it's total meritocracy, both sides of the aisle. But I will ask this, like, what was it like meeting Rob, who just got done working for John Boehner, Bob Ney, George W. Bush, and now he wants to work for a Democrat? So was there any distrust there at all?
Well, it was a little more of a, Alice in Wonderland. No, like, first of all, I'd come from this extremely liberal office to work in for tobacco spitting, Western North Carolina situation. And then suddenly they're like, okay, and here's your senior LA, and by the way, he's a Boehner staffer. Okay, great. And actually, I thought he was terrific from the start. It was pretty funny at some point when Rahm cornered me in the hallway. He hadn't spoken to me for 6 months, but we were gaining traction with the SAVE Act. It was an Immigration Enforcement Act. Glad we've solved that issue. We've got it all taken care of, but. And, Rahm just he pigeonholes me, sticks his finger in my chest, and he's like, you've got a Bob Ney guy writing all your stuff. Did you know that? I'm like, yes, Rahm, I knew that. Great, thanks. So, kind of fun to, when your old boss attacks you and you're like, okay, I don't work for you anymore.
I remember that moment vividly because Heath Schuler drags John and I with us over to Steny Hoyer's office. And it's all because our immigration bill, which was enforcement, was introduced with 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats. It was very popular, but Democratic leadership did not want to touch immigration, particularly enforcement first. And so Rahm had to, try to kill this thing because a discharge petition came out. I don't know who could have possibly written the discharge petition.
It just organically happened, yeah.
It had to have been a Republican who did it. And so we go over to Steny Hoyer's office, and Rahm corners Sean and says, you've got this former Bob Ney staffer who's out of control. He didn't know my face, but I'm standing there just like, oh, shit, right? So I look at Sean right after that, and I was like, Sean, my career is over. Like, Rahm Emanuel hates me. And he's like, no, man, this is it. He knows who you are.
Welcome to the show.
And pretty soon I started getting invited to these member-only meetings in Rahm's hideaway. And the chairman of the Hispanic caucus, Javier Becerra from California, looks at Rahm and he's pissed that he's pulled the 3 and 10-year bar out of this immigration package. And he's going nuts and he's all pissed off about it. And Rahm looks over at me and keep in mind, I'm 23 at this point. But I'm now the point person on immigration with Steve Haro from the Hispanic caucus. And Rahm looks at me and says, well, what are the numbers on this? And I said, well, if you put the 3 and 10-year bar in, we'll lose 25 Republicans and 8 Democrats because this group will turn on it. And Rahm looks back over at the chairman of the Hispanic caucus and says, Javier, it's out. Rob's got the numbers, you don't. And I was just like, that is real. And that was my first real taste in the back room of how shit really gets done. And Rahm was just matter of fact about it. He didn't give a fuck. I don't think he knew what the 3 and 10-year bar was.
No, he's trying to cobble together a bill.
He's trying to cobble together the votes, and we were working with Adam Putnam, who is a Republican from Florida. We had all these deals in place, and I learned more in that moment than my first 5 years of politics. But
it is so, that office was so much fun because none of us really gave a crap about the rules. And then suddenly, right on up to the congressman. Heath was, he just knew how to be center of attention because he was a Heisman runner-up and all this. But the policy stuff, he was smart. He was a hell of a lot smarter than people thought. He played the country lawyer thing to the hilt. But he really couldn't have given a crap one way or another about small stuff like 3 and 10-year bars. But all of us, me, Rob, our communications guy, Andrew, who loved to stir up crap, our tobacco spitting, chief of staff, who would seriously just he played offensive line at Princeton, gives you an idea of the redneck and power combination with the Ivy League, and his roommate was Lyle Menendez. All of us, we accidentally pissed off leadership the first few weeks, and then we found out that gave us power. So then we started pissing off leadership on purpose. And then the entire Blue Dog Caucus, including people who'd been in office for 20 years, are calling us up going, yeah, how you going on this one? Like,
Well, our office really set the tone for just like screwing over leadership left and right. That's why like watching the sort of loyalty and fealty that you see now on Capitol Hill is foreign to me.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because we would blast our own leadership left and right, like to the point where once I went on to work for Walt Minnick from Idaho, we were voting against procedural rules that nobody ever voted against, because the Washington Post came out with this list of members of Congress who most often vote against their party's leadership, and we really wanted to be number one on that list and be the most independent member of Congress. And I can remember as an LD, Walt calling me from the House floor saying, why am I voting against the rule?
Previous question. Oh, the journal. I forget about that.
Previous question, and I was like, Bobby Bright from Alabama is gaining on us for like voting against leadership the most, and he's like, okay, let's kneecap the bastard. And we just kept doing this shit, and like leadership like didn't know what to do with us, like because we were definitely the rebels. But hey, Heath Schuler got reelected by like a 10-point margin 2 years later in an R plus 12 seat, and our brand worked, and it was because we had an improv guy from Chicago, from Rahm Emanuel's office, and a Republican from Bob Ney's office just putting together, you know, a seat that we had no business holding.
Right.
I mean, we had absolutely no business holding that seat. But I will also say that, you know, the thing I learned from watching Heath Schuler that you can't teach. He's the cool kid at the table. I mean, it's like, I don't want to compare him to Trump at Mar-a-Lago, but like he's the good-looking 6'4" NFL quarterback,
right?
Who the other members just loved being around. They wanted him at their lunch table, and you could send Heath to the House floor with a letter or a bill that we needed co-sponsors on, and he'd come back and hand it to us with like 35 signatures from one voting session. And he could just go down on the floor and put that mitt on these guys' backs, and they'd sign, not even knowing what the hell it was. I would have staffers from other offices call me after the fact and be like, hey, your boss got my boss to sign on this bill. What the hell does it do?
It completely destroys our home district and all of our industries, but, you know, Heath said it was okay.
But that was definitely when I look back, my most fun 2 years on the Hill. That was just such a blast, such a good office, such an interesting staff makeup. When you look back at your time on Capitol Hill, a lot of times, you know, people think about whatever the news of the day is, the stupid headline of the day, or screwing over the other party, rat fucking somebody. But what I remember most are the moments where we got something done. What are the moments you look back on as your fondest achievements or memories from Capitol Hill?
Oh yeah, it's all small stuff. It's like, that's why I like the probes, because like you could, you know, work things in that, you know, we ended up, there were apple farms in western North Carolina that got hit by, you know, the blooms started to come out, and then there was a freeze on Easter morning that killed the entire apple crop for the whole year. And this was an area that was kind of being targeted for suburban development. And so all these farmers, we're going to lose a ton of farms if we don't get some aid in there. The only vehicle that was moving was an Iraq supplemental. And I just went ahead and called up the probes and asked if we could put in money for, you know, like farm subsidies in this supplemental. And I don't know if it was just because I was calling from Heath's office and they were told to be nice to Heath because he's running in an R plus 12 or what. But they were like, oh yeah, sure. And so suddenly now we actually got money in there, and that made a difference, right? That ended up saving all of these farms. And probably they all voted against him, and that's okay. I really could care less. It's a matter of like, why are you here? You're trying to get something done. And Matt, I'm sure you experienced this too. You can have a million different fights and a million speeches and votes and all this sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, I don't know what we actually got done. But if there's one small thing that you say, yeah, if I didn't make a call at that point, this doesn't happen for that constituent.
You make a great point. I mean, like, one of my favorite things about working for Bob Ney is I grew up in the area that we represented. Rob and I both grew up in the Ohio Valley. He grew up in the Ohio side of the river, me on the West Virginia side of the river. So even though I was in West Virginia, Bob Ney was our congressman. He fought for the steel industry, and he won over Republicans and Democrats alike and did what was right for his district. And it wasn't so ideological all the time. And I love that. As a young ideologue, I actually learned a lot and I'm a lot less ideological today than I was as a young kid because of my experience with Bob Ney 20 plus years ago. And so what frustrates me as a political consultant in 2026 is that, like, I have a state senator who literally fought to get something into an appropriations bill to save good quality drinking water for about 150 residents in his district. A huge deal. Like, these people would not have clean water to drink without this. And it's like, I put it on a survey and like nobody cares in a Republican primary. They want to know how far, like, everything that we have to do just plays to the national narrative. There's not a lot of deal making going on in Congress for these kind of projects like you talked about, which people can bash deal making. At the end of the day, that saved a lot of people's livelihood. Who cares that it had to get put into a bill that had nothing to do with agriculture, but it still mattered. Like, I look at Bob Ney and the things he did, and Rob will tell you, like, you go up and down the Ohio River in these Appalachian counties, and people, wouldn't have access to clean water. They wouldn't have access to sewer systems. They wouldn't have access to good roads, bridges, if it wasn't for the quote-unquote pork barrel or earmarks that Bob Ney was able to get in Congress.
Yep.
Well, and that's why he got reelected year after year. It wasn't because he was so far to the right. It was because he got shit done for his district.
Well, yeah, and they knew where he was coming from and what motivated him.
He wasn't that far to the right. I mean, if you look, I can remember us working regularly.
Well, let's be honest, Donald Trump's not that far to the right either. The whole ideological spectrum has completely changed. Yeah.
I remember Donald Trump, the Democrat.
Yeah.
Well, we would routinely, Nay's staff, work with Barney Frank and Maxine Waters on public housing. Mm-hmm. We worked with George Miller on labor.
Because the public housing that affected Compton, you know what, like, that same program helped people in Steubenville, right? I mean, like, it's the same thing. Whether it's a rural area or an urban area, there's need for affordable housing. So Bob would work across the party lines to get what was done, get what needed done for his district. And we just don't see a lot of that happening today. And it's not as fun.
That's what's so foreign to me today is that, when we worked for Heath Schuler, we didn't introduce legislation rarely without finding a lead Republican co-sponsor. And to Sean's point about the appropriations process, one of the things that shocks people about Nancy Pelosi is like how much she got her moderates. I can remember thinking to myself, like, you mean we can vote against you half the time and you're still going to help us win? They're basically like, yes, it's a math game. Yeah. We need 218 members. And I can remember her one time chatting with Walt Minnick from Idaho, who voted against her more than anybody. And I literally heard her say, Walt, how can I help you? If it's me raising money for you, you have it. If it's me endorsing your opponent, you have it. Whatever it takes to help you keep that seat, I'll do it. And I can remember us sending, Walt wanted to go down and speak on the Stupak Amendment on Obamacare, which was the provision protecting a woman's right to choose. And we got a call from the speaker's office saying, we just got word that your boss is coming down to support on a pro-choice issue. Is this a mistake? And I was like, no, like, he wants to go down and speak on this. They were looking out for us. Like, are you sure?
That's cool. I didn't know that story. That's funny.
Yeah. So tell us about the transition to first campaign life with Obama for America and then the White House. And I'm most curious to know if your experience in the White House was more of Veep or the West Wing.
I'm going to go definitely with Veep. It was, for one thing, there were actually a couple storylines that I know got leaked straight from our office into that show. Like, there's a point where we're at a event in Arizona, and there's a big bipartisan event. So John McCain is sitting in the van right across from us and all this. Biden is talking, and then his body man comes over with the phone and says, it's the president. And Biden goes, no, I don't need, like, he thought he was like trying to give him an excuse. He goes, sir, it's the president. All right. And so then we're laughing about that. It actually was Obama on the phone. And then, like, the next season of Veep comes out, and word for word, that exact same thing happens. So, but to Rob's point about what's actually, like, Veep got something right in that it's improvised. So much of DC life is like, when I was working for Mike Quigley, going back to the liberal spectrum, when he was representing north side of Chicago, y'all remember Sandra Fluke? She testified,
Yeah.
and ISA made a big political error in not allowing her to testify, because then that elevated her as a national figure. But the moment where ISA was saying that she was not going to be allowed to testify in this hearing about women's health, I was actually in the hallway with a group of high schoolers. We had prearranged that, when they came over off of their tour, Quigley would come out and say a few awkward words to them and then come back into the committee. And so I go in, wave to Mike nods to me, I go back into the hall, and everybody there, all the kids are like, who is that? And they're pointing at somebody, this young woman with all these TV cameras and lights pointing at her. I was like, I don't know. Mike comes out and he talks to the high school kids about nothing, and then he goes back into committee. I go back to the office, everybody's like, did you see what Mike did? Like, Mike just spoke to the kids from Van Steuben. What? It goes, no. Mike just led a walkout in protest because Sandra Fluke wasn't allowed to protest. What? Turns out I waved Mike to get out of the committee. He stands up and leaves, and then every other Democrat is like, yeah, let's follow him out. But we then, of course, owned it. We never lied. We never said, yeah, he did that. But we certainly gave plenty of quotes to the press going, yes, this is something Mike believes in and all that. And we got so much credit off of that idiocy. Just because DC is an improvised universe.
Which makes it hilarious that people think that guys like us have these grand conspiracies that we lead. Like, they have no idea what it's like for us just to run a conference call, let alone lead a grand conspiracy of the national government,
I can't get a bill on the floor. You think I can get somebody killed? Right?
And this is really when Democrats are at our best, when we accidentally stumble into it.
Absolutely.
People think we're really clever. When it comes to the West Wing, I had a good conversation with our mutual friend, Andrew Whalen, not too long ago. Andrew was our communications director, and we had talked about the Schuler office as the West Wing. And he fancies himself as Josh Lyman. I fancied myself as Sam Seaborn, although I wish I looked like Sam Seaborn. And we put you as Toby Ziegler. Is that?
Thank you. Yeah, make me the love guy. You know what? Actually, that probably is a little accurate, because when the rest of y'all were just zipping your, and I was one. All right, fine. You want to go set the world on fire on immigration? Could you at least put together a dear colleague first?
You were the sage veteran. And,
there you go. Yeah.
At the time, I was 23, and you were probably 33. So at the time, you were the grizzled veteran.
No, it's true. I took Rob to the woodshed one time for something that really wasn't his fault, but he was the guy who was in my line of fire. I'm like,
I probably deserved it for something else. So I took the heat. So you're at the White House. What is it like to write a speech for Joseph Robinette Biden? I remember when you took the job, I bet you $10 for every word of the first speech he actually said. How much do you owe me? And give us some insight into the mind of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
Yeah, he was such a pain to write for, because and it's partially because could actually really be good. The man has I have written some speeches for him, but also I've seen him spontaneously give speeches that actually really move people, and I've seen people move to tears. Biden, in ways I never saw with Obama, to be honest. Now Obama is clearly a far better, more polished speaker, but Biden could really get the feels. The problem is he kept getting in his own way. And so I would come in with a halfway decent, first draft, and he'd rip it to shreds. And so then I'd have to redo it in such a way that made it look like I did something different, even if I'm keeping a lot of the meat. The first page had to keep getting rewritten completely. And then finally we get to a point where, he thought it was solid and good. And then that was just the beginning. The flight over would be this crazy thrill ride of him coming out, sitting next to me. I mean, I had a badass seat, but he's sitting next to me, and he's dictating a whole new speech, and I type at 25 words a minute. I am pathetic in this, right? And so then, the only thing that would get him to stop feeding in and providing new stuff on the speech, and I'm talking structural edits, not just line edits, would be that, we'd hear the landing gear open up and be like, okay, all right, just go ahead and get that. And then he'd go back into his office to put on a tie. I'm trying to get it all polished up and then open this crappy little portable Canon printer, because Air Force Two has surprisingly terrible technology, or at least it did. You can't print anything. Barely has Wi-Fi. A Delta flight has far better Wi-Fi. But there I am trying to print it, and like we're sitting on the tarmac, the entire Houston Beltway is closed for us while I'm trying to get the printer to work. Right? So all of this sort of stuff. Then I get it printed, put in a book, come back down the stairs, and there'll be a point as he's walking down to go into the motorcade, there'll be like several of us, me, his body man, his political advisor, and it was more like he's just like walking into a bordello figuring out which one he's going to point to, and then one of us would get into the car with him, and the rest of us would be reprieved to go to the staff van. And sometimes, a lot of times if it was a speech, that was me. I'd get into the car, and he'd start dictating something new. But in the end, all right, he'd get there and he'd, work the crowd well and they'd be happy and satisfied with the event. And the flight back, all the way on the flight there, I'm like, I'm quitting. And then the flight back, it's like, I'm having lasagna with Chuck Schumer. Okay. This is great. It was just for 2.5 years. That was the kind of weird relationship there, but it was fun,
Wow.
in its way.
Well, I got a question. So
Yeah.
as a political consultant, my expertise is not necessarily in beating Democrats.
Sure. Yeah.
90% of my work, and I would say the same is true of most of my Democratic colleagues, is that 90% of our work these days is not in beating Democrats because there's such a small handful of districts across the entire country that are actually competitive.
I agree.
Most of our work is in Republican primaries. And so you are somebody that's been through 4 or 5 changes in congressional majorities.
Yep.
What early advice would you give, what early insights would you give on the midterms, and what advice would you offer to the Republicans and to the Democrats heading into November of this year?
Yeah, I'm a huge Tip O'Neill guy, and I always say, all politics is local. Still does hold, even though things have gotten, so nationalized in terms of social media and also the lack of, real local press and all that. But still, in the end, people care about the local issues. The thing is, then, the advice will be a lot different based on whether there's a remap or not. If you're running in a state where all your districts just got thrown up in the air, then you have to be very aggressive in terms of building up your name recognition. If you're actually still talking to the same people that you've been serving before, then it's like you were talking about with Bob Ney about just, hey, remind them of the clean water, remind them of the local side, just be present and be there, right? I do think that this time the wind is blowing in a Democratic direction, which means that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're a Republican in a seat, you're going to get wiped out. Absolutely not. 2018, I ended up working Central PA, and Scott Garrett held on to that pretty well. But it means that you have to kind of stick to your knitting there. What redistricting does is it means that you have to kind of get to those national issues better and really have to look like, not even that you're the furthest to the right or furthest to the left, but that you care the most about it, that you're the biggest fighter. And I think that's where gimmicks come in, honestly. I'm a believer in gimmicks. Rob remembers when we had the great Asheville gas shortage, which was really just a couple days where the pumps were running low, but everybody freaked out. And all of these different public service announcements we put out about carpool and all that, suddenly Heath is starting to look like Jimmy Carter in a sweater. But then he had a buddy with an oil truck, and he rode shotgun into this oil truck driving over the Smoky Mountains and drove into Asheville, and suddenly everybody thought the gas crisis was over. So, okay, a good gimmick is a better way of dealing with any of this stuff than, solidly, trying to debate the issues and go to the farthest end. You just have to be known for something.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that. And I want to go back to what I said earlier about loving Rahm Emanuel. It's not... And I also found it interesting you called him... You worked in a liberal office, because I don't know today if Rahm's considered even close to the far left or liberal. But
sure,
the reason that I say that is that what I respect about Rahm Emanuel is he gets politics, he gets campaigns, he gets messaging, he gets tactics. Yeah. And I always feel like there's 3 important things in an election. You got the national mood, you've got tactics and campaign activity, gimmicks like you talked about, but also candidate quality. So when you're looking at these swing districts, the ones that are out there, and some of these swing states even, how much does the actual candidate matter? Like a Heath Schuler mattered in Asheville, North Carolina. How much do the tactics matter, and how much does the national mood matter when we're looking at who's going to win in November.
Yeah, I think the candidate matters a ton, and what Rahm, knew in 2006 and ticked off a lot of people, honestly. He actively involved himself in primaries, as you said, he's not that popular among the left in Chicago. Part of that was actually he involved himself in the primary to unseat Peter Roskam because he was pushing Tammy Duckworth in there as opposed to this person named Christine Segalis, who probably had more local support, but Rahm muscled in Tammy. She did not beat Roskam, but now we call her senator, so obviously he knew something. You mentioned Heath. Heath was a great candidate not just because he's a former NFL quarterback, or to Rob's point, he was comfortable at the cool table, but also that district, you have Asheville, which is the most liberal place on earth, it's Boulder, Colorado, stuck in the South, and then we had 15 counties. 14 of which went for George W. Bush, and our most populous county went for Dennis Kucinich, right? So that's what you're trying to cobble together. For years, they kept on running somebody who was in the model of Kucinich in that, and they'd reach 45%. Oh, they got close. All this. They bring in Heath, who's from Waynesboro. He's on the other side of the district. The people in Asheville never really took to him or trusted him, but they saw a winner, and so they were willing to line up. And he got the border counties to actually kind of feel comfortable with him. So that's candidate quality too, right? And
the other thing with Heath is he was the real deal. He was goes to Biltmore Baptist Church every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
True believer, a hunter. We weren't going to be called a typical godless Democrat, gun stealing, liberal, because he isn't. And that's what drove our liberals nuts, was that they're like, oh my goodness, we're essentially nominating a Republican. But then he was also a Democrat on labor. He was a Democrat on clean air, clean water, and environmental issues. And so it was he was the ideal candidate.
Yeah.
For that seat.
And that's it. It's those issues actually figuring out what actually matters in terms of, south side of Chicago, I saw them run Dan Lipinski out on a rail because he was pro-life. Well, okay, so's the Catholic Church. He was a solid Catholic, right? And for a long time, that was a Democratic stronghold and all this. And now we ended up losing my friend Chris Kozicki, who actually got me into the Irish Echo and all that. He was my big Irish connection. The biggest Irish people are the ones who don't have Irish names, by the way. Somebody named Kozicki feels like he's got to spend his life making up for it. Abdon Palish was the same way. But Kozicki, he's like, yeah, I didn't leave the Democrats left me. And what he's talking about was Emily's List going after Dan Lipinski. I'm
going to jump in real quick. You gave advice for Democrats, but for the Republicans this year, I learned a couple lessons, and I'll preface the question with this. In 2010, when Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama were very unpopular, we ran away from them in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried our very best to establish ourselves as independent. And Walt's his own guy. I'm sure that to a degree Heath did the same thing, but had more traction already in his district than we did in Idaho. But I think in some ways we weren't going to win the race either way, but I think it hurt us running away from the party, because the midterms in wave years totally down to the brand, where Obama was unpopular enough at that point that the Democratic brand wiped so many of us out. And I think the the Trump brand by November is probably going to be so weak that it's going to hurt Republicans across the board. Do you think it's smarter for Republicans to run away from Trump or to double down on MAGA?
I'm going to agree with the point that Matt wants to make right now. I'm looking at your eyes and I'm seeing the same thing, because I don't think that the Trump brand is really all that damaged among the Trump voters. You're still at 41% approval. It's been 41% forever. Where the real danger comes in, though, is with all the redistricting, particularly Texas. I don't know Ohio. You guys know Ohio. But particularly Texas, all those districts were drawn based on 2024 numbers that were all based on a huge shift in Latino vote. And if you look at what happened in New Jersey and Virginia, and then just basic common sense about, you target Latino neighborhoods for ICE informants, it's going to come back. I think that's where the real freaking danger comes in, is that these numbers that you're counting on for 2024 ain't going to be there in 2026.
But if you're
let me bump in, because Sean's exactly right. He's exactly right.
But if you're a Republican in a tough district, let's say around Philadelphia or in
Bucks County.
or in Long Island, if you're their strategist, take our partisanship aside. Do you advise that guy to defend Trump and double down on MAGA or to run away from him?
I do neither.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
neither. I agree. Neither. Here's the issue that you're running into here is it's a little different. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never seen somebody have more control over a party than Donald J. Trump. To this day, it is his party. It's not anything else. It is Donald Trump's party. Like, he's 90-10 pretty much across the country with the base. He's never lost his base.
Yeah.
Never. So, like, the problem that Republicans have in these off-year elections are not they're too tied to Trump. It's that Trump's not on the ballot. When Trump's on the ballot, Republicans win because he turns out low propensity, non-college educated voters that probably don't show up. So that's the issue that the Republicans are facing. Like, Donald Trump has to take a very active role in these midterm elections. That's why I'm very interested to see his speech tomorrow night. He does need to win the Latinos back. Like, he's got a little bit of a problem there but it's not as bad as Rob would probably think. It's like 48% of Latinos think he's gone too far with ICE. 48. Not 58, not 68, 48. He hasn't completely lost Latinos because of the deportations that ICE has done. So, like, there is room for Trump to grow still and to fix this, but the big thing is the economy's got to be roaring and people have to have money in their pocket, have to feel like affordability's got under control. He has issues that he has to deal with, but running away from Trump is not a path to victory in most of these swing districts. It's really not, because if you lose your base and they aren't motivated to go vote for you, you can't get across the finish line. Like, if you look at Ohio 9 is a great example. I had a candidate there last time. Trump won Ohio 9, and my candidate lost to Marcy Kaptur by 2,000 votes, right?
Wow.
Trump's not the problem, but Bernie Moreno ran behind Trump, and my candidate for Congress ran behind Bernie Moreno. Barely, but just enough to lose in what should have been an election that got us across. Now, Ohio 9 is one of those districts, I think it's been redrawn, that Marcy's finally going to lose this time around. But I get what your point, Sean, is that I think that in Texas, man, it's going to be a dogfight in some of those districts because they build it on 24 numbers that aren't going to be the same in 26.
Right.
That's just, I don't know that it's going to be a net positive. I think that we got more than we bargained for. I also think, I'm not at the White House, I don't have inside information, but my understanding is that the Trump folks never thought that California was going to do what California was going to do. And it totally offsets anything that they did in Texas and other places. So it's going to be a tough dogfight of an election, but I don't know that it's, a 60-seat swing, and I don't think Republicans lose the Senate. I think it'll be a bad election for Republicans, probably, but I don't know that it's as bad as Rob is thinking. Right?
I think the guy's going to be. Well, I've lost the majority as a Democrat and a Republican. I've got plenty of credibility on this. I know what it takes to lose. This guy's.
I will endorse his ability to lose. That's true.
Yeah. This guy is a political lead balloon this year. The recent polling just this week, he's minus 47 amongst independents. And I know midterms are largely decided by each party's bases. Those folks losing the independent vote that big, a lot of those folks voted for him last time.
But the independents can change in a heartbeat if the economy comes roaring back. Like, and that's what you're thinking. But again, Trump has never lost his base.
Yeah, the economy's not.
When Bush had terrible election in 2006, Bush lost the base. The base was gone.
Right?
Well, here's the thing. I agree with you that it's not going to be a 60-seat election because there aren't 60 seats.
Good point.
If there were 60 competitive seats, it would be a 60-seat swing. It would be 2006. It would be 1994. I mean, these numbers are bad, and we don't need Donald Trump to lose his base. We need that 90% support to dip to 85. And that's enough to do it. And to your point, if you go back to 2016, Republicans have had 3 good or decent election nights. And those have been the 3 times Donald Trump has been on the ballot.
Right. No, that's a big concern that he's not on the ballot. And that's why I think he has to really insert himself into these midterm elections.
Is he getting involved in primaries? I'm not following.
Yeah, no, he is. And I mean, his endorsement process is chaotic, I guess, is the best way. I mean, like, you just don't know when it's going to come. And somebody that runs primaries any political consultant that says they don't sit on pins and needles waiting to see what he does, because he's an like, look, there's so many politicians, they endorse my opponent. Like, I don't give a damn. Like, they don't make a difference. Even if they're well liked, they aren't going to persuade other people to make up their mind on who to vote for. Donald Trump does carry weight. Now, I mean, like, it's more than any politician either side of the aisle by a long shot. But his endorsement is not everything. Like, I mean, there are times that he's endorsed and not won. As a candidate in Georgia, I understand, is behind. And I'm not working in Georgia, but that's just what I've heard. So I do believe that he looks to try to pick the right people. He wants people that are going to be loyal to him, obviously. But I also think that
he doesn't want to be with losers. Yeah.
He wants people that can win, too. Like, ultimately, what Trump wants to do is win. Because I think he knows if the midterms go really, really poorly, that is gonna be tough for his last 2 years in office.
I don't think we've ever had a president who's more powerful and more influential in his party's primaries. If Donald Trump,
that's true.
If Donald Trump endorses a Republican candidate in a primary, that guy is gonna win.
95 to 90%, yeah.
What Sean and I are familiar with is if Barack Obama endorsed us in our primary, we'd probably lose our general.
Yeah.
So I think Trump's power is in the primaries and not in the general, because I think there are a lot of people that are Donald Trump fans that show up when he's on the ballot and go wait in line to vote for him. When he's not on the ballot, you look at 2017, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, 25. Every year he's not been on the ballot has been a big night for Democrats. And he gifted us a great campaign moment the other day when he said, "You haven't heard affordability for 2 weeks. Affordability is solved. I won it. It's over. I can't imagine things possibly being better." The reality of this economy, and it's the same thing that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris ran into. When you run around saying everything's great, look at the stock market, half this country is in a recession. 40% of the stock market is in 5 tech companies.
Well, yeah, that was the problem that Biden had. Because honestly, in a lot of measures, things that we like to talk about, the economy was actually kicking ass for him. But the price of eggs was, going up. And just, like the things that people touch and see. And then he could never really talk about it in that relatable way. Which is ironic because he's one of the more relatable people. Like, he actually was far more in touch with that shit than. But Obama could be disciplined with how he spoke about such things. Biden always had a little bit of a George H.W. Bush with the milk scanner type of feel, of being a little too removed. I don't know, man, what I would have done differently. I wouldn't have had him run in the first place, but everybody knows that wasn't anybody's choice but his. I'm not convinced that if he doesn't run, then suddenly everything's hunky-dory for the Democrats. They would have torn themselves to pieces over Israel, over inflation, over, half of them would have started marching with the, defund the police again, one of the most suicidal political slogans ever. And, I think Kamala was probably about the best candidate we could have had, and we couldn't have gotten there any other way.
Yeah, I mean, there was no time to have. There was a primary.
No, and really, conventions, that's what conventions are supposed to be. That's what they used to be.
Yeah.
You just
I think the opposite for 2028. I don't know if you have an early candidate or not, but I think in 2028, we have to have a robust, big, messy primary. And the party has to feel, someone's got to catch fire and ignite the base, because in 2016 the base felt like Hillary was shoved down their throat. In 2024 they felt like Kamala was shoved down their throat, and she was by necessity, with 107 days to go. And even in 2020 Biden was a sort of deal. It was a brokered deal.
And Sean, hold that thought on who you think the nominee should be for 2028, because we're going to get to that later in the program.
All right. Ponder.
I missed getting to your time at the Pentagon. Like, how the hell did that happen? What was it like? What was it like working for the Secretary of Defense? We've got this improv cat from New York to Chicago.
Yeah.
He ends up in D.C. He's a speechwriter writing poems for Rahm Emanuel, and now all of a sudden he's in the fucking Pentagon flying around with the Secretary of Defense. Tell us a little bit about that experience. And are you a big Department of War guy or Department of Defense?
No, I actually side with the Republican majority that just passed an NDAA that doesn't mention Department of War. I think the place is still called Defense. But the way I ended up there was that, well, first of all, I got my master's degree on the Hill because the War College comes around saying, we're offering free classes. Does anybody want in? Like, that's the full extent of the way I chased my national security credentials. But then taking these classes, I actually really got into it, right? And so then I ended up with sort of a badass sounding degree. But I have no other military credentials or connections except for by marriage. I married into a Navy family, or Marine family rather, but we say go Navy during the Army Navy game. Then when I'm working for Biden, and as I've said, it was a thrill ride in itself. But after 2 years, I was really ready to get out, and I write probably the best speech I ever wrote, which was a eulogy for Rafael Ramos and Wenjian Liu, two New York City cops who were assassinated in their patrol car in Bed-Stuy by some guy who was pissed off about Freddie Gray and came up from Baltimore to kill them. As you mentioned, my dad was a cop. This really hit home. And so I wrote a pretty killer speech. It was really good, and it focused a lot on what it means to be a New Yorker. All right. Well, another New Yorker by the name of Ben Rhodes saw that piece, and then he said, who the hell wrote this, and he contacted me. So suddenly I have this opportunity to have coffee with Obama's deputy national security advisor, and I used it as an opportunity to start bitching about my current job. And he says, well, Ash Carter just got sworn in as SecDef and he needs a speechwriter. And he picks up it was a classic Washington scene. The type, it was like, well, let me pull a couple strings for you. Suddenly I get an interview over at the Pentagon, and before I can even mentally process whether I belong there or not, what the job might entail, they're offering me 3 times what I was making and double the staff. Yes, okay. So I go over there and I start working for Ash Carter, and then I'm learning on the fly. And he was a weird guy. He's a Harvard professor, very technocratic. I think he was very good for the department. We never really connected on any kind of deep level. And then, after a year and a half, I was out. And then I got called back in 6 months later into the Trump administration because the Secretary of the Navy, Trump appointee, was looking for a civilian speechwriter. And, my name circled around, and I really hit it off with him. So now suddenly I was a civilian, not 100% permanent, but basically a permanent employee over at the Pentagon, writing for the Secretary of the Navy. And, it was great experience. I ended up sticking around there for 6 different SecNavs because the current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, actually got that Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, fired.
Here's a softball. What do you think of Pete Hegseth, and does he make you feel more or less manly?
I think he's not serious, which is a heavy indictment to say about somebody in that level of position, but that is a deadly serious job. Going out and working out with the troops every once in a while when you go and visit, that's a nice thing. It's a nice connection thing. But if that's all you're doing, you go, you work out with the troops, you give a press conference, you go home. I don't get the sense that he's having those really important meetings, which is the reasons why a SecDef travels. If you're out there trying to, scream about what name you should be called as opposed to what job you have, it's concerning. And then this Mark Milley thing. I just saw General Mark Milley speak. He's retired now. He did not let loose or anything like that. He was very statesmanlike. But he did say something that I didn't realize, which is that the National Security Strategy, this document that comes out every year, is very different this year than it has been for the last 40 years. And the second line of it is Pete Hegseth writing this opening saying, we will no longer pursue candy cloud concepts like the rules-based international order. And Milley was saying, that really scares me because we wrote that order. That's what happened after World War II. I'll take it one step further. We died for that order. And so if you're dismissing it as an abstraction, a candy cloud thing, then what comes in there? And I don't feel he's really thought that hard about it. Just I would take that job too if somebody offered me. I'm irritated at Tom Tillis and Roger Wicker and Joni Ernst for not being more serious about that. I get it. It's hard when the president puts out nominees. But I think they turned down that nominee. They could have gotten somebody better, a rock-ribbed Republican who would pay more attention to those, core issues.
for the record, and not looking for a big debate here, but I mean, every military person that I talk to on the other side of that thinks the world of the guy. Military enlistment numbers are at a 15-year high. There's a lot of positive things that are going on too. We've had some incredible missions that have gone incredibly well. Now I know you guys might disagree with that, but I mean, I don't know that it's, again, I think these things tend to fall on partisan lines, and we're going to, in this day and age, we're going to tear apart each other's nominees and our people in positions of power.
Here's what you don't understand about Democrats. We hate our party.
Okay.
We like each other. We also, like, you know, what I think Republicans, like, they'll defend anything Trump says or Hegseth says. Like, I love Matt to death, but like, in the 2 years we've been doing this, I've not heard him give an inch. I mean, literally.
That's not true. I've criticized the president multiple times on this podcast.
You have orange Cheeto dust around.
I have criticized the president multiple times.
I mean, we could have a whole episode making fun of Democrats. I'd be delighted to do it. I mean, I support them out of necessity because I think MAGA is really, really terrible.
Remember, we had an episode where you had to say something good about Trump and I had to say something bad about Trump. And so we've been down this road.
And you know what? And
I love the guy, and I think he's done a lot of great things, but I was willing to make a couple stands.
Hey, I picked out 2 big things that Donald Trump has done that I support, and to this day, I stand by it. I think we should get rid of paper straws. I supported that executive order. I
don't know, Rob. That's a strong stance there. But...
And more importantly, I stand by the president's resolute executive order to get rid of weak shower heads. I think that we should not have job-killing, choking water pressure controls. We should let it go. Like, let's really, keep
just let it fly.
So I think there's two ways you can look at Trump. You can be like Rob, who just every day is just furious at something he's done, or you can look at him and be like, man, it's so much more entertaining with him in the White House. Like, the stuff that comes out of his mouth is just gold. It's classic television.
I would gladly go back to boring.
I do believe that there is a pendulum that swings back and forth between entertaining and boring. I don't know that Biden necessarily represents the boring, but like, look at Ralph Northam, who before, the blackface pictures, but like, he was the epitome of boring. He was just like, oh, we want reassuring,
As somebody who worked for Biden, though, can I?
Yeah.
So, like, to me, Joe Biden, the senator from Delaware from the 90s and the early 2000s, would have been a very entertaining president.
I agree.
Joe Biden in 2022, at the end of his life, was not the same politician by any stretch.
I completely
agree with that.
I would agree that he wasn't the same guy that I worked for in 2013 to 2015. He was, now, to be clear, he always has had, a weakness in terms of discipline, in terms of speaking, much like Trump, right? Like jumping all over the place, not sticking around, and saying the odd thing that comes back to haunt him. What I saw with Biden while he was president, mind you, I didn't work in the White House at the time. I was still at the Pentagon working a little bit for it, but I wasn't part of the administration. I saw he had definitely lost a couple miles off of his fastball. And so I actually was quicker to criticize him. Not that I was being all that public about it, but people were making excuses for him, saying, like in the State of the Union address, like, oh, well, you can't pick on his stutter and everything. I'm like, I can pick on his stutter because I saw how he used to overcome that, and now he's not bothering, or he's not trying, right? And I'm not convinced that he ever lost any bit of his mental faculties. You feel free to disagree with me on that, but like, I think he was sharp, presidential all the way through the end. But as a politician, as somebody with the skills to be able to speak on a regular basis and respond well, no business being in that race. And, I'm personally a little surprised that he won in 2020. Like, I think that may have been a little bit of the retreat to the safe, retreat to the, whatever. May have been COVID worked well to his strengths, campaigning from the basement. But he's always a guy who could surprise, right? But I just remember watching that State of the Union address. Forget the debate, but the State of the Union address, I was sitting at home white knuckling, going, like, this can't work. He tried to be slick and quick with Marjorie Taylor Greene and just like looked all over the place.
Yeah.
Either you stick on script or you try to play the improv game. but doing both is not going to work.
Whenever I think of boring politicians, I think of one of my favorite lines from The West Wing. Bob Russell is so dull, his Secret Service code name is Bob Russell.
Exactly.
Well, Sean, you are a fantastic guest, and we could go on for hours, but I have things I have to do. I'm sure you guys have things you have to do. So we want to get to a section of the show that we call the Shotgun Nine. Nine quick questions. Don't need to overthink this. Fun. Rob and I'll take turns firing questions at you. And also, we really haven't gotten into golf yet. We got to ask some golf questions because this is a show about golf and politics. But I'm going to go with one more political question. Who would your choice be in 2028 for the Democrat nominee for president?
I'm going to go with two follically challenged candidates. I would love to see either Mark Kelly or Mitch Landrieu run. I don't know if either one of them is going to take a shot at it, but both of them handle themselves very well in terms of speaking, in terms of also, taking a little bit more of that middle line that Rob was talking about, being able to speak blue collar, working class, real issues, as opposed to, kind of stuff. That's where it is. Not, at the risk of career suicide. I am not the biggest Klobuchar fan. I don't like Gavin Newsom all that much. We'll see what happens. But yeah.
What's the state of your golf game, and any thoughts on the National Links Trust situation in DC?
Yeah, the state of my golf game is terrible. I am not a good golfer, but that actually makes me care about what's going on with the Links Trust, because my contact with golf is primarily I live a few blocks from Langston, and I can go and hit some balls there, and then I can go out to Haynes Point, where Rob and I once had a round there, which was the perfect example of how golf can join wildly disparate levels of skill and still have a good time. We got paired up with these two random guys. Then, they don't know what they're getting into and everything. And I get up there and I hit a shot that was bad even for me. It goes straight into the bushes and, you hear somebody die off in the distance. And I see them rolling their eyes going, oh God, what's going to happen? And then Rob gets up there and he puts it on the pin. And so they had no idea. What? We had a great day that way. And I think you start cutting off access like that, yes, Trump makes some nice golf courses. He's an artist with Bermuda grass, but that's not necessarily what's needed there to get people to have access to it. Historically black, links over at Langston, where this guy Ted, who then taught me and my dad how to hit some balls. And that was a real bonding moment, because my dad, he never played golf, but he and I, we were able to get out there. I don't know that we could have done that if that was a nice but expensive course.
Well, I've criticized President Trump twice on the podcast. Yeah. Once I thought Paula White was just a horrific choice for his spiritual advisor and all that deal. The other time was on the Public Links Trust, and I'm still hopeful that I think it's early enough in the process that there's enough golf people in Donald Trump's orbit that I think can get a hold of him to say, this is not the right move. And again, I think Donald Trump is amazing at creating golf courses. I'm going next week to play Trump Jupiter. I'm excited about it. Every time I've been to a Trump property, it's immaculate. I think that he could turn it into a much better golf course, but that's not what's needed. Public golf, especially as somebody who grew up, the only way I could afford to even play at the public golf course was to work a part-time job at the course to get free golf. Access is a problem. Not everybody can afford to be a member of the clubs that Rob and I are blessed to be a member of, and we need to have that access to those golf courses. And so, anyway. Yeah,
and not everybody needs to be members. It would be a waste for me to be a member of a nice club, because I'd still be hitting the ball terribly, but that's okay,
There's something special about good public municipal golf courses that need to be in our culture.
Amen, brother.
For sure. So, speaking of golf, have you ever had a discussion with Presidents Biden or Obama about the game of golf?
I have not. I know that there would be points where there would be some kind of weird moment where Secret Service, you get to start following what they're talking about and one of them is Celtic is outside. It was what the fuck? What do you mean Celtic is outside? Well, Celtic was his code name and everything like that. And it turns out we'd find out later that he was over at Haynes Point hitting balls, which probably was a real pain for everybody else. They probably cleared the whole deal out. But I know that he liked doing it just to, do it. With Obama, the only thing that I ever heard was, that when he was getting criticized for playing golf, that he just kind of said it in frustration to David Axelrod. He's like, this is the only time I ever get outside. And I can dig that. Like, I feel like it's a ritual. Every president gets picked on for playing too much golf. But, man, you're in house arrest the whole time. I think if you can get a good long walk, that's wonderful.
And guess what? He has a secure phone. He can talk to a world leader on the golf course if he needs to. I've never had
100%. And then he can go, now watch how I hit this drive.
One quick follow-up on that. You talked about white-knuckling watching the State of the Union.
Yeah.
How bad were you white-knuckling when Joe Biden and Donald Trump were arguing about their handicaps?
Golf, that was the one animated part of that whole damn thing. It's like...
I disagree. I thought it was Biden's high point of the night.
Yeah, it was the one time that he actually engaged. No, I mean, I think, like, talking to presidents is like, sports is the one thing. Rob knows this, but my only conversation with George W. Bush was, my wife and I were lining up at the Christmas party, and give him credit, him and Laura shook hands and took pictures with everybody, which, Obama doesn't do that. Trump doesn't do that. Like, I wouldn't do it, but they did that. And so then we're waiting on this long line to get there. I'm like, what am I going to say to George W. Bush? And then as we're going in, Aaron's like, I don't know what, like, I said, let's talk baseball. And then as we walked into the room, we get announced, and suddenly I'm shaking hands with the President of the United States, and I said, that was a hell of a curveball you threw at Yankee Stadium. And he immediately just gets into it. He's like, oh, yeah, my heart was beating so fast, and I really loved it. And the bulletproof vest, you'd think it would be constricted, but I had tried it on a little, and I really kind of got in the whole thing there. And, and he's talking the entire time we're taking the picture. And then finally, as we're walking out of the room, he's like, I feel like that was a highlight of my presidency. And I'm like, oh. So if you could talk about, like, sports with any kind of connection way, like, and I think golf is a beautiful thing that way, because even no matter what somebody's skill level is, they've got a golf story. Not everybody has a hunting story. Not everybody has a hockey story, basketball story, but everybody's got a golf story.
Is there any job left in Washington, D.C. that you haven't had? And is there anything that would pull you back into the game? Any candidate or any big post, or run yourself?
Well, I would love to run only because I feel like I'd be good at it. And like we all know, people, that's the ego thing. Oh, I'd be better at the job. I don't know that I'd be better at the job, but I've written speeches for so long that I know I could deliver a better speech than most of the people I've worked for. And I think that'd be fun. To like campaign and just kind of on a regular basis, go room to room or big hall and just kind of see if you can, get that. But I ain't from anywhere. I wouldn't be able to run for the seat that Nadler's vacating on the Upper West Side where I grew up. I'm way too conservative for that. Quigley's running for mayor in Chicago. Hey, it'd be great if I was back in Chicago now, but I'm not. I'm happy in D.C. I think a position maybe back in the Pentagon would be pretty cool. I wouldn't mind, being chief of staff for the Navy or something like that. But for now, I'm happy doing freelancing and just hiding in my basement.
I think you'd be awesome replacing Eleanor Holmes Norton as the non-voting member. I can't think of anybody who would turn a non-voting position into a more powerful role than you.
Well, that is the thing. It's like, that needs to be gimmicked up beyond belief.
You would leverage that non-vote better than anybody that's ever done it before.
Yeah.
Well, what about...
we just lost Jesse Jackson, and obviously to say he had a complicated legacy is, putting it seriously mildly. But I do think it's kind of sad that he didn't get a chance to run for that delegate position because he wanted it. He actually, hidden D.C. history is that Jesse Jackson wanted to represent it, and Michael Jordan wanted to play for it.
Hey, even though I'm well-dressed, I'm still oppressed. Jesse
There you go.
What about an entertainment? One job that would bring you back into entertainment, like SNL... late night.
I am too old for SNL. Lorne Michaels has been open about age discrimination, and I think he's probably correct. He's like, I don't hire anybody over 25 and all that. But I would love to, write for something. I actually had a student of mine who used to work for Seth Meyers. So, as you mentioned, knew him in college, knew him way back when. But he said that there's, a thing where they end up sending out jokes, straight lines to a list of 100 people to, start writing jokes for that night's monologue. And then they just start picking out the best. And if they take your joke, they pay you. I want to get on that list. I want to start getting in on that. Because that sounds a lot like how we wrote the White House press correspondence dinner. It was like every hot shot throw in jokes. I only got 2 jokes ever in that thing, but they made my life. I was so happy. So I would love to be a joke writer for some late night type of thing.
If Rob Ellsworth was not a lobbyist or a podcaster, What job do you think he should have?
I actually could see Rob making a lot of money as a golf hustler, not a golf player, but like just a straight up, like go onto the car, oh, I don't know what I'm doing type of, and then suddenly gimmick around maybe, the 11th hole where he does something insane and racks up a whole ton of cash out of it. I think he could just make a firm living that way.
Show up with like the plastic covers still on my irons.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Take it easy on me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you could be like, with the proper handling, if you got your own Paul Newman, you could be Tom Cruise in The Color of Money. Learn how to put the ball just on the lip. Oh, it didn't fall in, like the art of the dump. I could see you doing that beautifully.
It's preferable to like working in politics. I'm looking for a way out. People are like, oh, it's such a cool job. I'm like, get me out. I want out.
I believe it.
Favorite weekend destination in the DC, Maryland, Virginia metro?
Having kids actually brought me around to the idea of skiing in this area. I never would have thought of it. Like, I was a big time skier up in Vermont. I ski bummed and everything. Then I moved to Chicago, which is flat. And so I completely stopped. But then when the kids came around, we started going to some mountains in southern Pennsylvania, and turns out they don't suck. So I actually really like going skiing at Liberty, Whitetail, that sort of stuff.
I didn't have that on my bingo card for that question.
Yeah, that is.
Good response.
Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of U.S. presidents in addition to the 4 that are already on? So 4 new presidents for a new Mount
Rushmore. Okay, because I am a TR fan, but he's already up there. Good question. I got to go Kennedy. I mean, he's literally in frame right now. Okay, so John F. Kennedy, George H.W. Bush, actually, I feel is one of the most underrated presidents of all time. Brought the Cold War in for a soft landing. Ended up, budget deal, all that stuff. I've recently learned that James Garfield actually was an amazing president. He just didn't live long enough to do anything. So I think it'd be kind of cool to recognize that.
Were you a fan of the Netflix miniseries?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the type of thing that brings it into it. Like, oh, yeah. Like, I love weird stuff like that, right? And then, I'll go a little more cliche and just say, yeah, put FDR up there, too. You had 2 Roosevelts packing it. Did you see there was Howard Baker actually gave an interview at some point where he's talking about working for Reagan, and he says, there's always this voice in the back of your head thinking like, there's room on Mount Rushmore. We could do something great. There's room on Mount Rushmore. And then he goes, by the way, there's not. I asked the interior to look into it. It has to do with how the rock fissures work. Nobody can carve anything. But I love that idea. Of course Howard Baker looked into that.
So my last question is involving who has reinvented himself more in Washington, you or me? I mean, when 2 months before you met me, I was a Republican living with my girlfriend, and a few months after that, I'm a Democrat with a boyfriend.
Yeah. I think you've gone for the full reinvention thing. I actually kind of went on a conventional glide path of the kids and the house and the dog and all that. It's just I just can't hold a job, like you said.
Well, and what's been the key to your successful marriage, and how much credit should we give to Erin besides all of it?
100% on that. Putting up with me, she puts up with the changes and all that, but she also is the constant breadwinner. I am having fun doing some freelance stuff now. I get to write for Ford, which is cool, but it's not a steady gig. So when I'm out pretending I know about race cars and stuff, she's out there actually working for a living. And I think the other thing too is we're on the same wavelength about so many damn things, living where we want to live. We like certain restaurants, getting into certain things, and we like traveling. And our kids, God bless them, have been really good too. So we got a good thing going, I got to say.
Real quick before Matt closes it up, we got to get a plug in for White House Clubhouse. Yeah. Tell us just really quickly about your book series.
Of course, absolutely. So this is actually with my kids. We came up with this idea of 2 kids who their mom becomes president. They move into the White House. They hate it because they're being watched all the time. So they find a hidden clubhouse that connects them to every other kid who's ever lived in the White House. So the first book, they go back to the time of Teddy Roosevelt, help him get a pony up to the 2nd floor, and then they go out and save the California redwoods. The second book is set in the War of 1812, using all my Navy trivia about, the Marine and Navy battles around Washington. They come up and the whole place is on fire, and they save Washington's portrait. Third one just came out. It's called White House Undercover, and it is in the FDR era, Great Depression, Washington, D.C., and it's modeled after the Maltese Falcon. They're chasing, a bird and trying to figure that out.
Well, it sounds like a bunch of woke bullshit. How much would it help you? How much would it help you to get on the banned list? To get on the banned book list?
Oh, I would love that. I would love, if I can mention that, it hints at Eleanor's gay partner. It really does. So, yeah, please put my word into whatever, organizations you think you can get me banned from.
Perfect.
Well, I'll ask the last question, but Sean, I want to put you on the spot and have you agree to come back throughout the midterm a couple times, maybe to do some analysis of what's going on.
Man, I love it.
And we've enjoyed this, and there's so much of your background we didn't even get into. But the last question is a question we ask everybody. If you had to pick a dream foursome to play golf with, and alive or dead, you have to have a politician, a professional golfer, and a celebrity in this foursome. Who are the three people you're picking to be in your foursome?
Okay, all right. So the celebrity, I think I just have Springsteen on the brain because I just scored tickets to the Nats Park concert. Nice. And he'd be like kind of a fun guy to walk around with. Like, my daddy and we used to walk on the grass. Oh, I don't know. But let me see. What, a professional golfer?
Yeah.
Does Charles Barkley count? Because he might actually make me look good. And then as far as a politician, dude, I would love to meet Huey Long. I would love to spend the day with him and,
Is that the first Huey Long reference, Rob? I think so. That's 86, 80, I don't know what. I think this is episode 86, and that's the first time we've heard Huey Long.
Hey, man. All the King's Men is my favorite book, so yeah.
First Charles Barkley.
Yeah.
There you go. See, I'm an original. There you go.
Well, Sean, thank you for taking the time to talk with us tonight. I hope we can have you back again. This was a lot of fun. And thank you to everybody that listens to Golf and Politics. Please go to golfandpolitics.com, sign up for our email newsletter. We'll alert you every time a new episode comes out. Anywhere you get social media or get podcast content, we're there. Follow us, and we appreciate all the great feedback we're getting. Sean, thanks again for spending the time with us tonight.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Rob. This was awesome.